All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. So for this video here, I'm just gonna keep things short and brief. Um, Also, I'm not feeling my best. I have a slight headache. But anyways, I think it's important to get the information out. Maybe I can make like a better, cleaner version when I'm feeling a bit better at a later date. But nonetheless, I worked hard on preparing some of this material I'm just gonna cover here. So what I did was. Um, Based on my 24 years researching UFOlogy and everything, and some contacts that I have, when you mention who they are, it doesn't matter. I have a good deal of information. I also have my own personal spiritual background with my various religious studies. And what I have here today is a great solution and answer. I don't even think it's a theory. I think this is the resounding truth of the matter pertaining to why the aliens are here, what they're doing, and all of that. And so I'm going to present what I feel is the overall scenario, like the reality that everybody is experiencing. There's been a lot of different opinions over the many decades as to who and what the aliens are, why they're here, and all of that. You've had government secrecy for 80 years. There's been, in the last decade, this big disclosure movement looking for disclosure, fighting for disclosure. But overall, the 80 years has been many different theories and opinions and claims and testimonies that have popped up over time. And right now, it's a smorgasbord of information that's out there in the UFO community. There's so many people popping up and claiming they have information or that they were witness to things. So right now, there's a smorgasbord. It's like being at a buffet at a hotel. There's just millions of dishes everywhere to pick from. What is the right information? What should people really believe, and what is the real outlook on this whole alien situation here? So I'm going to offer up a little timeline, just basic bullet point type timeline of UFO history in terms of information coming out. So it's not a timeline of UFO events, but it's a timeline um, that will, in very simple form, show when key figures arose, key figures who contributed to the information that is UFOlogy, right? Like the information base and like what people think and believe. So I have that little timeline, and basically about a page of other information, a few paragraphs that I prepared to read for this year. All of it's just in very short bullet point type synopsis form. Nothing highly detailed here that I'm going to get into, just to save time for everybody. Make this a shorter video. So, anyways, let's jump into it. So, like I say, right now we're faced with this smorgasbord of information. I've been studying ufology for 20 years. I've had my own experiences. A lot of people out there in the world, whether they're old or young, are coming to ufology for like the first time, and they're new to a lot of information. I feel bad for people like that in our current day because they're entering the buffet line with just thousands of different dishes everywhere. And it's going to be hard for them to select what may or may not be true. So here's the general overview of everything. Now, first, I have two, before I get into the brief timeline of key information being released from the 1920s onwards. Before I get into that, just two paragraphs I want to read. The first paragraph shows a brief bullet point form synopsis of three major mythos. That's just the buzz term I give it. Mythos in UFOlogy. So in the UFO community, there's three main like belief circles, uh, narratives, right? So I'm just going to cover those three first because a lot of people don't think about it like this. I've had my 24 years to analyze this and think about everything. So I'm just trying to here offer up my introspective and my experience in research. I'm sure people will agree, but nonetheless, there are these three mythos narratives that have arisen over the many decades, and they are prevalent in the UFO community. A lot of people haven't recognized that there are these, so-called mythos, these narratives. They just go along with them. Then the second paragraph I'm going to read is just a short little like conclusion synopsis, and then I'll get into the timeline. Then after the timeline, I just have a few more paragraphs to read, basically like conclusions main points on what the deceptive narrative, like the overall deceptive narrative, is in contrast to what the true narrative is, right? So the truth behind it all, what is really going on, what's the purpose of it, all right? So that's going to be the layout of this video. So the three narratives, right? So overall, just giving it an arbitrary term, because these three mythos are all basically under one umbrella, I just call the overall umbrella the dark UFO mythos. You could even call it the LARP. But the reason I call it the dark UFO mythos is because it's got dark connotations to it. All right. So the first mythos was the Dulce mythos that emerged in the 1970s and 80s. This was just some key points from it. It talks about a program involving secret bases, usually underground. Talks about evil extraterrestrials. It talks heavily on that. It talks heavily on people working with evil extraterrestrials. It also talks a lot about contracts made with evil extraterrestrials for human abductions and other type of experiments. Right. So overall, this is quite a dark narrative, dark mythos. It showed up in the 70s and 80s. The next mythos emerged in the 2000s. This was the Serpo mythos. This was some key points from that, where it talked about an exchange program between Earth and extraterrestrial civilization of the Ebens. It also went on. Another key point was about secret space programs, such as the governments having really advanced space programs that are kept secret and capable of going to other worlds and so forth, and bases on other planets and whatnot. Next, the Serpo mythos also highly expanded upon many details of extraterrestrial uh, beings, races, and just details in general. Um, whether it's true or not, we have yet to see, but nonetheless, it provided lots of extra details. And finally, another major point from the Serpo mythos is the lore about this type of extraterrestrial genesis of humans on this planet. Okay, and then the third mythos narrative is the secret space mythos, which also showed up in the 2000s. This elaborates and builds on what is the Serpo mythos primarily, but the secret space mythos is also attached to the Dolphin mythos. So, because all three of these are intertwined in their own ways, I just put it under the umbrella term of the dark UFO mythos, because at the end of the day, they present a very dark narrative, to each their own and all together. And it's a very deceptive narrative. And let me explain. So this again, this is just now we're to the point. I'm just going to read the one paragraph. It's just like a quick, brief, one paragraph synopsis conclusion, and then I'll get into the timeline. So the dark UFO mythos started being built upon what were abductees or contactees' perceptions of experiences they had. And I'm not saying it was exclusively founded upon. I'm just saying it was being built upon abductees or contactees' perceptions of experiences which they had on their interpretations of what was going on, i.e., the ET motive and intent. This such contact began in the 1920s. It existed before then, but it heavily picked up in the 1920s and 30s, onwards to the 1960s and 70s. And then in the 70s and 80s emerged, as I mentioned, the Dulce mythos. And then from there into the 90s, the Dulce mythos was expanded upon by a number of prominent yet deceitful or deceived individuals. Then in the 2000s, the Serpo mythos emerged, which was ironically disbelieved by the vast majority of people in the UFO community. So it fizzled away, the website for it fizzled away. Yet in the 2000s, around the same time, upon the Serpo mythos and rooted in the Dulce mythos, emerged a number of figures, people, who would be less prominent, who developed the secret space mythos, which is the ultimate deception tool program, in my opinion, and will likely be the plan that will be utilized and is being utilized against the people for when the inevitable big arrival event does occur. Okay, so this is the timeline. Again, this isn't a timeline of events, it's a timeline of when key information was, released to the public, right? So in the 1920 and through various different ways, right? But in the 1920s to the 1950s, right? So at the start of all of this, we had many abduction and interaction events. Okay, and this contributed uh, to information because these people would often testify about their experiences. Okay, so that was the first release of information, and because these people didn't really know what was going on during their experiences, it was very difficult for them to make sense of these things. So they had their own opinions on what was taking place in the events. Okay, and this led to a lot of misperception and misconceptions amidst the people hearing these narratives, these stories, these accounts. Right, so that's the from the 1920s to the 1950s. Then we get into the 1960s when we had the famous Betty and Barney Hill incident, which has negative connotations to it. However, if you listen to Betty Hill's testimonies, she can also shed a positive aspect to this, but I don't need to fuss about details. We had the Betty and Barney Hill incident, and in terms of UFOlogy, it started to spread a narrative of negative extraterrestrials, right? Now, anyways, then we get into the 1970s to the 1990s. And during this period, like I said, we had the Dulce information come out. We had Billy Meyer come out in the UFO community, sharing the information that he had. I don't believe his information is factual. Nonetheless, that's irrelevant. His information came out during this period. We also had Richard Doty's information coming out. We had the information from Benowitz. Now, I personally, I love Richard Doty. I think he's a very great person. Understand what he did back in the 70s and 80s. That was his job to do that stuff. I'm not here to talk about him. I like him. I don't want to make him appear to be bad or smear him in any way, because I really I like Richard. He's a nice guy. He's come out fully out in the open talking about, and this is in interviews for people to see, nothing secret. He's admitted everything, opened up to everything that he did, why he did it, why he had to do it, and so forth, who he spoke to, and who may have been misled, and so forth. He's been very, very open about it all, right? So I just want to be abundantly clear. I'm not here to say anything bad about Richard Doty, but we all know what Richard Doty, did in the 70s and 80s with Mr. Benowitz. Now I know the story behind it. I know that there wasn't some negative plan to take down Benowitz, physically or health wise. We all know that Mr. Benowitz passed away, but his passing away had nothing to do with Richard Doty. Mr. Benowitz was suffering, for lack of a better term, mental issues. I can't say illness, I'm not a doctor, but psychological issues that he himself was going through before they started monitoring him. Everybody knows Benowitz lived by one of those bases and he had all this high tech equipment. And he was doing things that were either illegal or quasi illegal, listening in and basically spying in on military operations. Of course, this is not good, and the military would have to respond. And this, in part, is why Richard Doty went there. But anyways, I'm not here to talk exclusively about that situation. But Mr. Benowitz had been deluding himself and convincing himself before Richard stepped in on the scene, in believing that all these extraterrestrial things were taking place at the base, like secret stuff, dark stuff. Benowitz was coming up with all this himself first. Benowitz was convinced that there were reptilian beings or just evil extraterrestrials, whatever it might be, targeting him. And really, a lot of what is the Dulce mythos actually originated with Benowitz, and it started to delude him and drive him into a type of psychological mental illness. Richard Doty came in on the scene, blah blah blah, did what he did as a means of trying to essentially, I don't have the best words for it, but like disinformation, misinformation, misdirection type of thing. To they didn't want to just haul in Benowitz, arrest him, throw him in jail, and all this and that there. They could have, maybe what he was doing wasn't outright illegal, but I'm not here to talk exclusively about that. But I think it's important to talk about these things. Why? Because the Dulce mythos is one of the most major components and contributors to all the other mythos that I talked about. right? So overall, the dark UFO mythos, like I said, the umbrella term that encapsulates all the other three mythos that I talked about, they're all rooted in what is the Dulce mythos. So it is important, right? But I don't want to make all this about Doty and Benowitz, right? But Doty's job was in part, and forgive me if I misspeak here, um, it wasn't to drive Benowitz insane. Benowitz had driven himself insane to start with, right? Through his delusions and thinking that aliens were monitoring him and all this. Benowitz, was going through some genuine things and activity and this and that there, but he was connecting dots together for himself with his own mind, and that's what deluded him. Then Doty came in on the scene, like I said, to, instead of them just outright arresting Benowitz or, all that there, Doty and Benowitz became friendly with one another, if not friends. Um, this has been spoken about on public interviews. So it's simply not true that Doty came there to delude Benowitz. Now, it's important for me to mention these things because people could then turn around and say, that, well, it's Doty's fault for the Dulce mythos. But like I said, Benowitz had concocted this stuff up before Doty came to him. We don't know verbatim what Doty fed him as, you know, information to help push him away from things that could be factual, right? Information that would do that in order to protect actually true and secret things, right? Secret operations. We don't know exactly what was said, and that doesn't matter. But Benowitz had come up with all that information, his own ideas to start with. So the Dulce mythos truly started with Benowitz, in my opinion. Okay. And Benowitz had those famous papers. I mean, back in the day, back in the 90s and the 2000s, we had those famous papers that were released. There was one called the Octopus document that was massive. There were many other Dulce documents that were released. And this all ties right back to this. There's a famous one that was allegedly written by Benowitz. I remember reading all these. I used to have copies of all these. But nonetheless, Benowitz was convinced that there was a secret underground base um, that was working with extraterrestrials that had negative intents, and he had convinced himself of this before Doty even stepped in on the scene. And Benowitz was convinced that he was intercepting extraterrestrial transmissions that were talking about this nefarious alien activity. Um, so Benowitz basically put out this narrative about that, which is the Dulce narrative, right? The Dulce mythos. So it really did start with Benowitz. Doty's job was to come in and try to protect what was, real and secret, and to direct the public and Benowitz away from those sensitive things, right? So once this Dulce mythos emerged in the 70s and 80s, it became very, very popular. A lot of people became very, very paranoid about this idea that the aliens that are here are not actually good, they're bad, and that they're using us for things. Okay, and this became more destructive as a mythos as it went into the 90s. Not that it wasn't destructive to start with. Um, So, like I was saying, this was for the period of the 1970s to the 1990s. This emerged after the 60s when we had the Betty and Barney Hill incident, where they had perceived, at least in their first testimonies, or in what the public had garnished from it, that it was a negative experience at the hands of negative extraterrestrials, the Zeta Reticuli Greys. This is where the idea in the public's eye that the Zeta Greys are nefarious basically originated, not exclusively, right? But then, like I was saying, we got into the 70s up to the 90s, and this is when we had Billy Mayer starting his circle of belief and doctrine, narrative. And then we had Doty and Benowitz, like I said. Then we get up to the 90s, which is where I was at just now. So we're into the 90s now on the timeline. This is where, like I said earlier, certain key figures came out. These are less prominent figures. You can't be as prominent as Richard Doty in terms of contributing to UFO information. Um, Meyer's information is all bogus. That doesn't even matter. But up until this point, up until the 90s, in truth and in reality, Richard Doty had been one of the largest contributors to the information base. But after that, he gave further information. He's given a lot of interviews and testimonies since the 2000s, even since the 2010s and 20s, that are out there for the public to see. which is the only information that I'm referring to in regards to Richard Doty, nothing else. So in the 90s, however, while the Dulce mythos was thriving, okay, in the UFO community, we had Lear come out. He was one of these prominent figures, but not as prominent as the ones before, and just not as prominent overall. But he was a minor figure, you could say. We also had Lazar come out. We also had Linda Moulton Howe. We also had people like William Cooper and quite a few others, right? So these less prominent figures, but still, somewhat prominent, these more minor figures emerged in the 1990s. And what all of them did was they bought into the Dulce mythos. They became duped by it, just like how Benowitz had become duped by it. Okay? Um, Linda Moulton Howe was given information that was not factual. She was given misdirecting type information. And she went down this tangent of evil alien greys, utilizing humans like cattle, and even harvesting, parts and blood from cows, and all of that. There, she went down that tangent, and if I'm not mistaken, she's still stuck in that tangent of belief. William Cooper, I've got his book, Behold a Pale Horse. Bob Lazar, everybody knows about him. I don't need to talk about him. I personally do not believe Bob Lazar, but that's irrelevant to this here. And we had Lear. In case people don't know, in my research, I've seen this proven. Most people who haven't done the research will disagree with me, but Lear, Lazar, and Billy Mayer were a trinity at the time. They were, no, I can't even say conspiring with one another. They were a triangular formation within themselves, believing one another, working with one another at the time. And if you don't believe me, that's absolutely true. Go look it up for yourself. It's also why Lazar's UFO designs that he allegedly saw are literally just the same things that Billy Meyer had perpetuated as well, which were also basically just copies from these probably bogus German documents. They came out, decades. I don't know exactly when they emerged, but they were available in that time. And these documents depicted like the Hannibal craft and various other alleged German UFOs. And these are probably fake documents. But nonetheless, they literally, Billy Meyer just ran along with that narrative. And that narrative, again, is part of the Dulce Mythos narrative, this dark narrative that gets into the Second World War. I do believe that Germany was working on UFO craft. They lost the war because they couldn't perfect their technology and craft that they had. Um, and there's alleged photos of the German craft, so it's possible. But I think you know even though Germany didn't get anywhere with their UFO plans, so they lost the war and everything. Um, People weren't content with that. People wanted to come up with, like what were delusional theories and narratives. And one was Billy Meyer. So Billy Meyer's claims were that, these aliens, the Palladians, were visiting him, but, they had swastikas on their craft. They looked German. They might have even spoken German. And Billy Meyer and quite a few other people were claiming to see German like human aliens flying these craft, and they would often mention swastikas. Another example is we had the fake testimony of Admiral Byrd alleging to be his diary, which is just not true. And this story alleged that Admiral Byrd flew into the inner Earth and saw um, UFOs with German looking aliens that looked human but German. Again, they may have even spoken German, but that there were swastikas on their craft. And all of this tries to connect that symbol to, Agartha, Shambhala, because what they want to do is perpetuate this concept that there are these aliens living within the earth. The danger of this mythos is that you're actually starting to align with what is something like, and I don't want to say the word, but so I don't have to say the word. It begins with N and contains the letter Z and ends with an I, right? That circle of belief, the people who support that figure, that evil individual, they actually claim that he met with good aliens and that the allied nations met with the bad aliens. So frighteningly enough, the Dulce mythos, that whole narrative, is actually rooted in what is the N bleep ZI belief system. Because, that individual, Adolf, was allegedly trying to do all this theosophical and mystical stuff, and he was trying to find Agartha Shambhala. He wanted to contact this race of supermen, super beings who looked German, blonde hair, blue eyes. You'll start to see the connection here. Okay, that was a you know mystical German idea at the time. These Palladian Nordic German type supermen, okay, who had these craft. You'll start to see a very strong N bleep ZI connection to all of this Dulce mythos. Okay, and part of this belief system, which William Tompkins gets into later, but he's later in the timeline. I'll get to him when I do. But like I was saying, that old World War era belief system about these Germanic type super people, okay, who had UFOs and who worked with the Germans. You have to be very careful with this dark UFO mythos, because you'll end up believing what these N bleep ZIs did. Okay, because at face value, nobody in the UFO community is going to come out and say that, oh no, we believe like Adolf did. But you're going down that same path. You just don't realize what's at the end of that path that you're walking on. And what you're walking on is the path that says that Germany aligned with the good aliens, the German looking aliens. And that's why a lot of these alien interactions, they speak German and look German. You're going down that path. And that path is going to tell you that the Allied forces sided with the bad aliens, which leads you to the Dulce mythos, where it says that the Allied nations are working with evil extraterrestrials to oppress mankind. Okay, so at the end of the day, like I said, people in the UFO community don't want to admit that what they're believing is at the end of the road an N bleep ZI ideology, but they are. And that's why I want to try to help people understand all of this. But claiming that Germany didn't lose the war, that they secretly won the war, that they created a base on the moon, that's in UFOlogy as well, and it's rooted in the Dulce mythos and the N bleep ZI uh, belief system, right? Having an idea that they have a secret base in Aldebaran, or that they traveled to Aldebaran, and they have secret bases with reptilians in Antarctica and all this nonsense, and one day they're going to try to take over the world with like a Fourth Reich and all of that. These are things that millions of people believe, and they won't accept at face value that what they're believing is what the evil, that clan in Germany did at the time. But that's what they're believing, right? And they're demonizing their own American government and the other allied nations governments. That's what they're doing. They don't realize it, but they are being duped, right? So anyways, getting back to the program, the reason I mention that is because, like I said, Lazar, his story is a lie. He may have worked there at some point in some loosely affiliated job position, which is the only thing that has been verifiable. Everything else that he's talked about has been lies and proven to be lies. And his sports model design, I'm just reiterating this for everybody, was a copy of the Meyer designs, which are copies from those fake German documents. Again, this all plays into the hand of the superior German super race. Okay, so beware of all this stuff. Lear, like I said, was a part of that little Meyer, Lazar, Lear trinity. So Lear came on TV in the 90s alleging that the Allied nations had been working in secret with evil extraterrestrials to do oppressive things to humankind. Okay. William Cooper came out saying the same thing. Linda Moulton Howe fell for the same type of information and perpetuated the same thing. So, like I had said earlier, in the 70s and 80s, the Dulce mythos emerged, and in the 90s, it was built upon by these minor figures. Then we get around to the 2000s. This is when Serpo mythos came out. Now, the Serpo mythos again has ties to a disinformation or misinformation campaign. Richard Doty has said before on public record, on publicly available interviews, that it is not an overall true story, as was given on that website, but that the story the backbone to the story has truth to it. So basically, just a quick takeaway is that the story is not true, but elements of the story and points from it are true. Okay, that's just the simplest way to put it. Forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but anyways, so in the 2000s, once around the time the Serpo mythos emerged, we had William, also known as Bill Tompkins. He worked for NASA to do with the lunar landing design program and whatnot. He started appearing in a lot of testimonies and interviews. Not a lot, but he did quite a few, such as Project Camelot and a few others. You can still see them on YouTube, for example. Bill Tompkins had a very captivating story, but it's the Dulce Mythos 100%. And his one ties, it doesn't even conceal, it opens up the box of the N bleep ZI story, right? So what Bill Tompkins says is like a amplified, unveiled Dulce Mythos, where he directly connects over to that N bleep ZI ideology that they didn't lose the war, they won the war, right? That they made bases on the moon, Antarctica. They've been working with reptilians and evil aliens, and their plan is to take over the world. That's what Bill Tompkins talks about. He talks about the secret space mythos that I mentioned earlier, right? So the secret space mythos, like I said, is unique in how it says that America's had a secret space program for a very long time. We've been capable, they say, of interstellar travel for a long time, that there's bases on different planets in our solar system and on the moon, all sorts of very deep stuff. And this is what the secret space mythos is about. And Bill Tompkins talks all about that. He fully believes that it's real. And Bill Tompkins famously said that, yeah, we landed on the moon, but when we did, there were reptilians there waiting for us to tell us to get the hell off their place, right? Just as a brief sample. Also, during the 2000s, we had the 20 and back stories emerge, such as from Corey Good and many others, right? There's quite a few. And in the last few years alone, we've had more people show up claiming to be part of 20 and back. 20 and back relies on the secret space mythos. Okay, so the secret space mythos had to emerge in the UFO community narratives before people could start claiming, hey, I'm part of a 20 and back program. You know what I mean? And then really here in the 2000s is where the waters for the UFO community become really muddied, right? Especially in the 2010s and the 2020s. So this gets worse and worse from the 2000s onwards. Because there's so many different figures popping up here, even more in recent years, right? But in the 2000s, you had a lot of other figures popping up talking about all these different things. One, for example, is Charles McNeil. He gives very intriguing testimonies. He has a lot of interviews out. I'm very cautious to believe what he talks about is virtually almost entirely the Serpo mythos, sometimes with additional details and information added. It talks about things, I believe he talks about things like 20 and back, right? So again, my bullet points here for the 2000s are Serpo mythos, Bill Tompkins, 20 and back individuals, and Charles McNeil. All of them are talking about what is the Serpo mythos, secret space mythos, right? Which itself is founded on the Dulce mythos. So there's so much building on what was originally a bunch of lies and delusions. Okay? There's never been any evidence from the start of this timeline that there are secret programs where governments work with evil aliens. This has not been proven anywhere at all, not by any documents, right? No documents. There's nothing verifiable that can ever validate anything from this dark UFO mythos, from the Dulce mythos. There's nothing. But people believed it. Why did they believe it? Because Benowitz's delusions and his documents that he and others put out there, striking fear. I mean, some of these documents, I remember reading them, it starts off like inducing paranoia into people, right? And the reason why Mr. Benowitz had deluded himself into this psychological, like calamity for himself, that same effect is what's happening to other people who believe in it. If you believe that, bad aliens are raising us like cattle to use our blood or flesh or whatever, our souls after we die, and all this nonsense, it gives you a very grim outlook on life. You're going to live in paranoia and fear that when you go to sleep, you're going to be taken. They're going to do things to you and whatnot. It's a whole pile of baloney. Yeah, there's some bad aliens who do things probably like that. Yes, but we're not here on this planet as cattle for evil aliens. I mean, this is ridiculous. We live our daily lives. We have economies. We have jobs. We go to school. We have daily lives, and we live them out. And we live our human mortal lives. We die at the end of our life. Our children live on. It's been regular human life all of this time. And when do you see aliens coming down and using us like cattle? You don't, because it's not the true scenario. Okay, it's a delusional myth that does nothing but strike paranoia, unnecessary paranoia in the people who believe it. And at the end of the day, there's no validation or true evidence anywhere to back any of those nonsensical claims up. Period. Okay, so a 3 point uh, synopsis of the overall umbrella of the dark UFO mythos. So this encapsulates the Dulce mythos, the Serpo mythos, and the secret space mythos. Okay, so from across all the decades that I just went through in the timeline, right? Those three different narratives that emerged in the UFO community, okay, all together under the one umbrella of the dark UFO mythos. It's this narrative that spins this dark story and outlook on our situation here. Okay, these are three main points. Okay, a synopsis. Okay, key principles. Principle number one is that it portrayed as neutral but realistically bad to our standard. Extraterrestrials created us. Okay? So, what I'm saying here is I did it all in bullet point type form, right? Not an expanded upon and explained form, right? So, what I mean by that statement is that this narrative states that aliens created us, right? But they're bad aliens, okay? Either bad or neutral. Okay, this mythos says that God and religion are lies. It says that these neutral or bad aliens use us for some things, like cattle, that they hybridize with us biologically. And it even goes as far to say that they take our souls after we die. They harvest our souls. This is what this mythos teaches. This is what, like, Linda Moulton Howe and many other individuals perpetuate. Charles McNeil, William Tompkins, many who have fallen victim to this dark mythos believe that these bad aliens created us. We serve them. We are their cattle. That's our purpose. In that after we die, they continue to use us by taking our souls. Okay? And there's a whole storyline about what they do with the souls, right? But I don't need to get into that. That's just point number one. This is, you'll see why I call this the dark mythos, right? That's pretty dark. But the second principle is that the neutral or bad aliens work with the government military in secret doing these operations, and that the government military is a super secret space force with Moon, Mars, and other bases. They have interstellar travel, even bases and projects that operate outside of our solar system. Right? So it's saying that there's so much, beyond just, the government back engineering some UFOs. I mean, this is going way deeper than that, into the Twilight Zone, saying that we have bases on other planets and other worlds, that it's super secret. You know what I mean? It's a whole nother level, you know what I mean? Beyond just saying that they've been back engineering UFOs. The third final principle is that very bad ETs, and this is where it ties into the 2026-2027 arrival big event. Right. So the third principle from the dark UFO mythos I'm going to cover here is how it perpetuates the concept that very bad aliens are coming to the Earth, said to be coming to the Earth, in that we humans will have to align with what is a galactic council or federation, okay, to survive against the invasion. Okay. Now, the only problem with this, like I mentioned here, is that This is actually self-contradictory. It's in conflict with the premise that the dominant ruling extraterrestrials on our planet are neutral to negative, right? If the aliens who created us and use us like cattle are neutral or negative, like to us, they're negative, right? To themselves, they might view it as being neutral, but they're negative. Let's just simplify it as that. If the aliens here on this earth using us, which isn't true, right? But if they're negative, right, then why would they want us to side with them as if they're good to protect us from worse bad aliens? It doesn't make sense. It's a flaw in the theory. Okay. So that's why I said this, however, is in conflict with the premise that the ruling ETs here are negative, right? So some figures say that this coming invasion is not genuine and will just be a staged event, like a blue beam event. Some figures say that the invasion is real, is a real threat, and could or will happen, right? So we have opinions across the board with this buffet smorgasbord. Like I said, I was saying earlier, I believe, maybe it was the first attempt where I had to take the video down, but it's like being at a hotel buffet with tons of things to choose from. What do you believe? There's so much out there, right? Um, but those are the three core principles of the dark UFO mythos. Okay, so what the dark UFO mythos wants you to believe is that negative aliens created humankind. Okay, in that the purpose we serve is to not live our lives, but to serve these aliens in some way. Okay, like they use our bodies or things from our bodies, in that we're only here like battery packs or vessels for them to use. This is a very dark concept. Okay, in that the game isn't even over when you die, because when you die, they're going to harvest your soul with this machine that's on the moon. Sounds ridiculous, but this is what the dark UFO mythos says. And with this negative outlook on life, where is any hope? You know what I mean? Nothing like that. It sucks all the hope, the faith, any spirituality out of you. It makes it look very mundane and dark, like we're the cattle for some negative aliens. A lot of people would say, oh, well, it's easy to believe. Yeah, I see why it's true, but where's the evidence for any of that? There's a lot of evidence contrary to that. Okay? But the thing is that there is a reality here. The reality, like I said, a solution to all of this confusion is as follows. So, to contrast it to the dark UFO mythos, three key principles, I've done three principles here and written in contrast with those first three. Okay? So, the reality is contrary to what the dark UFO mythos says, which is convincing millions, if not hundreds of millions of people around the world. Contrary to what the dark mythos says, bad aliens didn't make us. Okay, again, this, well, not again, but that dark UFO mythos has heavy ties in what is Gnostic perception. Gnostic perception says that the ones who made humans were bad, and that the true God, it wasn't the true God, that lesser beings, archons, made us, right? So all this dark UFO mythos is, in a sense, Gnostic in its approach. It strips away the authority and in the creatorship from God and replaces it with aliens, right? But anyways, the reality is as follows. God made us. He made all the aliens. He made everything in the cosmos. The cosmos didn't make itself, okay? It's impossible that anything come from nothing. Let's not be silly here, okay? So God is beyond all known physics and dimensions, and he existed before our physics and dimensions and universe. He created the universe. He created all the life through it. Which came first, the bird or the egg? You can never answer that question because it requires a creator to create one first, right? So God made us, not evil aliens. However, as I note, he may have used some celestial beings to participate in the Genesis type creation, right? And maybe not just this earth, but maybe everywhere. The Bible does talk about the Benai Elohim, the sons of God, who are here at our creation. When it says, "Let us create man in our image," and God uses the angels, the so-called angels, the celestial messengers, for all sorts of things. It's highly possible that He did utilize certain good extraterrestrials to help facilitate our creation in Genesis. But at the end of the day, this really irrelevant information, whether He did or not. It's like, anybody who runs a company Yeah, the staff are the ones doing certain work, but the credit goes to the one who runs the company, who made the company, who pays the staff. That was God in this case. So God made us all. Um, Perhaps using certain ETs, he made us, but that's irrelevant. But the dark UFO mythos says that God's a lie, he didn't create us, that religion's a lie. But no, that itself is a lie. God is real. And he does have a sensible, real religion. I won't get into which one it is and all this. Let's not get into that nonsense. Religiosity can be a scourge, but the reality of God and a law of being good and not bad, that's a very sensible, real thing. It doesn't require a book and a fancy religion. Okay? So God is real. He did make everything, including us. And he has a real religion, whatever you would want to call it. But it's a sensible one. Next, extraterrestrials monitor and protect us for God. This is the reality. Like, people won't want to listen to it. They won't listen to me. They won't care. But I'm here stating this. And I can tell you that when full disclosure does occur, and I don't mean from lying mouths of individuals, but from the ETs or from God himself, maybe even at the judgment day, people will learn that I was right. So I'm here to tell people now, they don't have to believe me. They probably won't believe me. And I could care less if they believe or not. But I'm just going to state the facts because it might help some people, right? So the reality is, like I was saying, that the extraterrestrials, whom God did make like every other living thing in the universe, these ETs monitor and protect us on this earth for God. They're doing a job, right? He has tasked some of them to, hey, look, guard the earth, protect it, monitor it, record this, record that, intervene here where needed, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And the other reality is that bad extraterrestrials, they're real. There are some bad ones, right? They're known. They are what has been known as the fallen angels. Okay, the book of First Enoch spoke about this. But anyways, in these bad ones, who are not a majority, they're a minority. They are the ones who, yeah, sure, they might do some bad abductions, try to hybridize with people, give us technology for bad. They might do all that stuff. That's what the Bible and First Enoch warned, anyways, from day one. Right? They've done these things historically. They're doing them again now. Okay. It doesn't mean that every one of the Greys or every one of the aliens is bad because some of them are doing it. Right. But anyways, but where the dark UFO mythos claims that these bad aliens can take our souls after death, this is not true. Okay. This is just a claim, a silly, wild claim that nobody can back up and never will ever be able to back up. And why anybody in their right mind will put any belief into such a lunatic claim, I don't know. But people do. Millions of people do. Okay? But the reality is that no. Little naughty aliens don't control our souls. They don't have a machine that can harvest your soul and then put it into some other body for them to use. They don't have that ability. Okay? And if you want to believe that, ask yourself, what evidence do you have to believe that? A trust me bro from somebody? You know what I mean? Um, but only God can transfer your soul after death. But even as the Bible accords, he often uses what are good messengers to accompany or assist in this process. So yes, some people at their moment of genuine passing may encounter or be accompanied by beings who may look human or whatever. Right? This doesn't replace God. It's just the fact that God, the CEO, has said, hey, go down here and assist with the people's passings and blah, blah, blah. Okay? Um, a bad person who fails at their judgment may be sentenced to an afterlife in another world or place where are bad extraterrestrials, which could account for the allegations that ETs or bad ETs appear to transfer our souls after death. And I'm mentioning that because you have individuals who have some type of psychedelic or paranormal experience or out of body experience or near death experience, things like that there. Because I mean, if you genuinely die, you don't come back to talk about it. So there's people who have had whatever type of experience, and they experience something like them being taken out of their body or leaving their body, and then their soul being taken by these beings, right? Who might be perceived as negative. And this is why they may believe such a narrative themselves because they saw it. They perceived that that is what they were going through. But the biblical reality, the overall reality is that, we're in a prison world here. That is the truth. We're in a prison world. Okay. And when our sentence is up, we go before the judge to be judged. And there's lots of staff present at that judgment. Okay. And when you're sentenced, if you're not good enough to move onwards and upwards, you're sentenced to you come back here, you return to prison in some place or way. Okay. You could be going to a lower prison, like in the Hades, right, which is in a different dimensional fold. But nonetheless, right, if you're resentenced back to the prison or a prison, you will be in a place with negative beings, just like we are now. So think about it. If you're a person and you had a near-death experience of some form, it wasn't your genuine time to go, to your once and final judgment. It wasn't your once and final judgment, right? But you came close to passing. So you're going through this near death experience, and then you see these beings around you. A lot of people record good beings like angels assisting them. Well, that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is where people experience bad ones who are taking their souls. Well, the reality might be that during their near death experience, because they're not worthy people, they're experiencing what it would be like for an unworthy person after their judgment sentence. I've gone through things like this myself in my own spiritual experiences. That's why I can relate. And these people might, be departing from their body during their experience. They might be taken through this wormhole or whatever, however it is that happens for them. And they might appear in another world where there's other beings. And they say, like, oh, wow, these beings look negative. And they'll have the idea that negative beings are God and that they rule everything, and that the negative beings are the ones that controlled their near death experience and took their soul out the body. But that's not what's happening. They're misperceiving what is tangibly occurring and visible around them. That's my point. Having one near death experience or going through something once isn't enough times for you to have, quality assessment of the overall situation. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, that's my offering there of why, if we are to give some credit to some of these claims, why the people may, like I said, giving credit to some of their claims, they some people might say, hey, well, I've seen this myself. I know it's real. I'm not BSing anybody. Well, yeah, maybe you did experience and see that, but you just have a totally wrong outlook on what the heck was going on. Did you ever consider that? That's my point. Okay. So principle number one, like I said, for the true reality is God made everything. God's in control. There's good aliens, there's bad aliens. The good ones can work for God. I'm not saying every single good alien out there is doing a job for God, but the good ones, those who are good ones, do indeed do work for God. They monitor the earth, they govern it, they have since the dawn of time. This accounts for why the UFOs and the aliens are here and on the vast hole. They don't attack us, colonize us, or do terrible things to us on the vast hole. They leave us be, but yet they monitor us. Countless people, contactees, and abductees relay good experiences with extraterrestrials. A lot of the extraterrestrials, not all of them, but a lot of them even look human. Okay, a lot of it has an angelic quality to it with nothing negative whatsoever. And some people have even been told by these good extraterrestrials that the earth is a prison, that they're here as like prison officers to monitor everything. Okay, so that's the overall reality. Now, the reality in the second principle, right? Second principle is there are obviously secret government military programs that involve the topic of UFOs and ETs, but what exactly was truly studied or encountered is secret, and there's no validatable proof for any super secret space programs. Okay, and it's unlikely we do have such programs to any established utilizable degree. That's just a reality. Okay, I'm not saying that there isn't one, but we don't have any validatable proof for it. So there's no valid reason to believe that we have any super secret space program, right? There's no reason to believe that evil aliens created us and rule us over and use us. There's no reason to believe that. Yeah, there's some bad ones out there and they do some bad things to some people. That's the situation, okay? And the bad ones have been visiting humans and military and governments and brainwashing them into believing, hey, we bad ones, we made you. We're your gods. You're just our cattle. That's the problem here. That information has made its way into a number of documents that have been out for decades that people put belief in. Okay, just because the aliens said that doesn't mean it's true. Aliens can lie as well. Aliens can also be misperceived as well. But anyways, going on, the third principle. So the reality, third principle, is that bad extraterrestrials are already on Earth. I gotta go, so I'll see you all later.